thank you. So Matilda and I work at a research programme called Oxford Net Zero, based at the University of Oxford's School of Geography. And critically, we are in the impact and engagement team. So a lot of the work we do is kind of the work that we all like doing, which is sort of out in the real world, speaking to real people. And it's kind of generally themed around this concept of what does it mean to take the scientific goal of net zero at kind of global level and translate that into what it means for governments or businesses or civil society. And we spend a lot of time thinking also about what is our role as a kind of academic institution in shaping that conversation, and how can we use our influence to ensure that the kind of people involved in that process, the people making the decisions, is equitable, both in terms of the procedures, but also in terms of the outcomes. And so one thing we've been thinking about quite a lot recently, and over the last few years it's been quite a core work stream, is in defining what it means for businesses to be aligned to net zero. And this is kind of the theory of change, if you like, that our team works upon. And it's this sort of idea that ideas kind of get spread along the system. So from the sort of very strong, high ambition voluntary initiatives, all the way sort of formalising through standards and eventually into international regulations. And standards are one of the sort of key tools in this ecosystem that we've been working on. And there are a lot that exist, lots of names: ISO, SBTI, GHGP, IFRS. There's lots and lots of acronyms to learn. But it's really important to kind of engage with these tools, because they are in theory shaped by this whole sort of ecosystem, but they become the sort of defining authority of what it means, who's responsible for what does it mean for a business to align to net zero, what does it mean, who's responsible, and all of these kinds of questions. So we see it as a very important sort of landscape to work in. And because of that importance, the governance of the standards bodies and the way that they're made is really, really important. So here are just a kind of handful of examples. There are many, many examples we could have chosen from, but where standards bodies have come under real scrutiny for both their decisions and for the sort of processes that got them there. So there have been kind of board member resignations, really quite untransparent decisions that have come up, and these really sort of present a risk both for the kind of credibility for the document. It's very easy to lose trust, but also in how useful it actually is in practice for the organisations who are going to be going to use this. So the natural question to ask is, if this is really important, okay, what is the governance of these organisations, at least on practice, at least on paper? What do they say about how they operate?
Cool, thanks so much, Ros. So I wanted to make a very brief segue into another research project that we've just completed, funded by the IKEA Foundation, which has allowed us to dig far more deeply into the governance of these different organisations, how they're funded, how decisions are made, what accountability systems there are for board members and staff. And one of the things we looked at is around how they engage stakeholders, because we knew from the ACCESS project that this is very patchy, it's very opaque. And what we found was that, in principle, these organisations, they recognise the importance of engaging widely. And many of them define target categories in terms of geography or in terms of knowledge background, in terms of sort of institutional background for who should be involved in the standards making process. And there's also different avenues for people to be involved. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a sort of broad spectrum of individuals taking part. It's often very opaque as to how to be involved in these systems, how people are chosen to sit, for example, in technical working groups, and, you know, what sort of perhaps other motivations are at play, let's say, in selecting people to participate in these. And I think this graph, which was produced by SBTI after the sort of the consultation at the end of last year for the new corporate net zero standard illustrates this really well. SBTI probably has one of the strongest sort of engagement frameworks. They have a lot of staff around the world trying to sort of draw expertise and reflections in from different stakeholder groups. But still, it's industry dominated. 75% of people who responded to the consultation are industry representatives, and it's European and North American centric. But we know SBTI's growth is in Asian markets because of supply chains. So you can see then who is sort of setting the standard, who's responding to the standard, really has global impacts, and whether necessarily the people who are being impacted by that standard are having a say in what they're being told to do. So with that context, that's the wrong laptop. We'll come back to ACCESS now. So we wanted to sort of unpack this sort of procedural justice question of how do we get different groups of individuals involved in the standard setting process, but also a substantive justice question, because we found from a systematic review that we did back in 2024 that just transition principles are really not well represented among the corporate guidance for how to be a net zero organisation. So we wanted to meld these different themes together and sort of unpack how we could both get a traditionally marginalised group. So our demonstrator cohort was a group of youth from 11 different countries, how we could get them involved in the standard setting process, but also simultaneously improve the sort of the criteria around what a just transition is and how organisations should be thinking about just transitions when they set net zero targets and when they're disclosing on what they've done to reduce their carbon emissions. And so what we did was we convened this group of youth for 6 monthly sessions of 2 hours each. And what we did within those is we tried to develop their capacity to engage directly with standard setting processes, so encouraging them, together with our partners at the British Standards Institute, to get involved with their national standards bodies and participate in the international standards organisations, sorry, a lot of jargon, but basically get involved in the ISO standard. And the other one was to encourage them to participate in SBTI's working groups. And so we had 4 of the cohort went on to do that, 3 in ISO and 1 in SBTI. So we had India, Kenya and Uganda represented for ISO and an Indonesian representative within SBTI. And the other thing that they did was they developed this just transition guidance text. So they drew on their own experiences as youth climate justice advocates, but they also drew on what is sort of known as best practice from academic literature, which we helped them compile, but also they reviewed other sort of best practice texts from, example, B Corp or Global Reporting Initiative, who are kind of front runners in this regard. And this is where I'm going to ad-lib from what we had originally in the presentation here, because something really exciting has happened. Yes. Who knew something exciting happens in the standard space? But it does. So in the last week, the draft ISO standard for net zero aligned organisations was published. And we were absolutely thrilled to see that some of the outputs of our group's work are directly reflected in the ISO standard. Why the work's not done yet. I'll start with the good stuff. Okay, so we developed the youth. Basically, they had their just transition criteria. It was put that into SBTI, the consultation. Waste of time. It felt like a sort of it wasn't a waste of time, but I feel like the standard knew what the standard wanted to be before the standard was published. ISO process a lot more sort of consultative, and there was a lot more opportunity for the youth to feed their views in. So they worked very closely with our colleague Kaya Axelson, who's the PI on this project, who was already a member on the working group there, to basically directly feed in the early stages of the drafting of this text, the ideas that they had for the just transition into the early draft. And then we followed that up by them then joining the working group in their own capacity so they could reinforce that messaging. So that's the Indian, Ugandan, Kenyan members that I mentioned. And so you see these 7 stages behind me, and I just wanted to sort of show the overlap between the text that's now in ISO and the text that you see up here. So, top management shall demonstrate leadership and commitment to achievement of the organisation's targets, taking into account the principles provided in and the need for a just transition. The organisation shall anticipate, assess and address stakeholder risks and opportunities arising from all climate actions, engage affected stakeholders, including underrepresented groups, transparently and inclusively in transition planning, decision-making and implementation, periodically review how actions taken affect the just transition, e.g. on labour, public acceptance and resources. So it feels great to see this, but it's not the end. This is, as I said, the draft standard, and what comes next is it goes to all of the different national standards bodies to get feedback on from their different stakeholders that they've got within their networks. And obviously, because of how the ISO system works, every national standards body has a vote as to what is included. So even though this beautiful document has been created in the working group stage, how much of that actually goes to follow through into the final stage of the final product really comes down to what national standards bodies decide to do. And obviously, it's basically sort of national and global level politics. They might not agree that having just transition as part of transition plans is something that is feasible, is necessary. Perhaps they might think it's exclusive for their own reasons. So this is kind of the sort of pinch point where things sort of go outside of our control. But there's 2 sort of further procedural justice things that I'd like to pick up on, and that we've kind of realised in the last 24 hours that we weren't aware of at the beginning of the process. And that is, I had a really hard time finding this document online, despite being very involved in the process, even if from afar. You have to be able to sort of access it through your national standards body, and in order to do that for free, your institution has to subscribe. If you don't subscribe, you have to pay £55 to download the document. So if you want to read the document in its draft form and then provide consultative feedback on it, you have to pay to play. So yes, I didn't realise that. We thought that it would just be like free for all. You know, it's honestly a little bit disappointing, but each national standards body has the option of sharing this PDF publicly. So we're working with our partners at BSI to encourage them to find ways to share this so that it isn't behind a paywall, basically.
So if you're all like lining up ready to download this document for £55, hold off. Yeah. And then the other thing I think that we were reflecting on was this idea of, okay, this language has come into the standard, but what were kind of the enabling factors that allowed that? And we came up with kind of 2 approaches.
Sure. Well, there was we kind of called it like strategic luck and timing.
Yes.
So the strategic luck was that we had Kaya on our team, who was already very involved in the working group, and she's very persuasive and very charismatic and very good at getting people to listen to her. And the timing aspect was that when this element came up for discussion, it just happened to be that our youth were ready with their criteria to input directly. And so Ros played a massive role in like copying and pasting.
Yeah,
a lot of that.
That's a lot of copying and pasting. But I definitely think it's kind of fair to say that it was this combination of having the kind of text ready to go, so literally being able to just sit down and have a spreadsheet that corresponds to the online form thing where you can just copy and paste the actual responses, but also then having the members having the capacity to go and engage themselves. And I don't know, it's definitely not one of those things that it was definitely going to end up like this. I mean, in SBTI, the language was not incorporated. So I don't know, I think we're just kind of thinking about what ways could we identify that made this a success, and what could you use in other standard setting processes that aren't necessarily about the corporate emissions.
Yeah, so we kind of now got the reproducibility question here. And I think this sort of leads on a little bit to the question of next steps for the project. So the main thing is we'll be continuing to support the youth who are part of their national standards bodies, because there'll still be a period of discussion later in the year around this. And the next ambition is to basically get funding for a network of academics in corporate climate action, because as you might remember from the slide about engagement and SBTI, it's very limited from academic circles, but there's a real need for empirical evidence to inform the standard setting process. And in particular, there's such a sort of rich knowledge base globally in those geographies that are underrepresented here that we really want to help feed in. And there was, just before this, there were some reflections from working from the youth who had taken part in these working groups. And it demonstrates that, you know, having expertise in your own right isn't enough to meaningfully engage in this process. You need to have some kind of collective support mechanism in terms of mentorship, in terms of, you know, G'ing you up when you're feeling like the industry voice is really strong, and sort of, you know, reflecting with peers about key ideas and what the implications might be. So we want to basically develop that network over the coming year, because standards will continue to be revised. This isn't the end of the line, and there's a huge number of opportunities to keep doing this kind of work.
And fundamentally, standards are only as good as they are. They are only good when they are actually used. So we can write the perfect standard, but it's only by engaging people properly and developing something that genuinely works at a global scale that these will ever have a real world impact. So join the network, stay in touch, and thank you very much.